Ah, come now, do not strain yourself, young neonate. It will take them some time before they breach the door. You did very well in slowing them down, but it will only be a matter of time before they reach us. I see you have suffered many wounds. Come, rest by my side. Let me pour you some vitae. Ah, yes, this will do. A bottle of fine, noble Bethian bloodline, aged in a skin barrel for 50 years. Mmm, a fine vintage indeed. One must take time to enjoy the little things, especially when their life is under threat. Ah, you remind me of my younger self. I too fought and bled for a mighty cause. Uh, once, long ago. Did I ever tell you the story of how I became prince? It is an interesting tale, full of blood and betrayal, like most kindred stories. I believe it all began during the War of the Ivory Tower. Yes, a fierce battle that was fought in the city of London between the common Carthians and the noble Invictus. None are sure who or what started it, but the one thing all agree on was the carnage it wrought. The streets of London became a battlefield of blood, as many of the other covenants were caught up into the conflict as if it was a storm. The war continued, as any typical war does with the kindred. It was full of betrayal and plans, but a fierce blow was dealt by the Invictus, and they managed to kill off many of the Carthian leaders in one fell swoop. Some say this was due to a great act of betrayal, one of the Carthians' own members. Many thought this would crush the fighting morale of the remaining Carthians and bring a swift end to the war. Unfortunately, this was not the case, as many Carthians are a strange group of creatures. They tend to only get stronger the more you try to destroy them. You see the now beaten and crippled kindred turn to a young neonate. I believe they called him the Blood Thief. Yes. He turned them from being a noble Carthian into a barbaric blood gang that fed and destroyed anyone caught in their path. Many mortals were turned to swell their undead ranks, forcing the war to turn in their favor, at the cost of their humanity, of course. Most kindred fled the great city as child turned against sire, and the mixed blood of mortal and immortal alike covered the streets. Towards the end of the conflict, the now crazed and frenzied Carthians laid siege to the prince's tower. Ah, yes, the Shard, the very building that we now reside in, my young neonate. It was created to be a symbol of kindred dominance over mankind. But during the war, it was nothing more than the last desperate stronghold of the prince, besieged by monsters. Funny how history repeats itself, my young friend, as we find ourselves in very similar circumstances. No one truly knows what happened that night, but a huge storm erupted over the city. and the great tower was seen ablaze with lightning. A massive storm began to scorch the mighty shard, and then began to envelop the very city of London itself. This lasted many nights, and during this chaotic period, kindred from all over the world began to feel the pull of the blood. They had terrible visions of kindred being massacred and destroyed by a shadowy figure, wielding a power that burned as bright as the sun. The kindred of London were being slaughtered by the hundreds. Elder and fledgling alike were being purged brutally. Many believed it was the wrath of God himself, destroying the wicked children of the blood for their sins. As the city became quiet, the forces responsible for this great kindred massacre seemed to disappear without a trace. The city became void of all creatures that dwell in the shadow. As time passed, younger kindred began to venture into the now empty city, looking for a chance to claim new feeding grounds. But to the shock of many, the ancient elders of the clans decreed that none of the blood shall enter London under punishment of final death to the kindred and their sire. The ancient elders began talks with each other over what happened in London, and decided that in order to hold each other and their progeny accountable and to enforce their decrees, they would create a power base from which they can spread their will. And so was the Crimson Council was formed, an alliance and collective of the most powerful kindred in all the realms. This kind of gathering of immortals has not been seen since the golden age of the Camarilla in ancient Rome. Many kindred around the world were in shock at this formation, this alliance of blood, as not much is known of the ancients, but one fact all know is true, that their lust for blood is only matched by their hatred of each other. For them to work together in this way frightened many kindred. Despite this new alliance's formidable power, they still needed young kindred to implement their will. And this is where my story begins. For you see, I was one of their agents, nicknamed an enforcer, a kindred who was bound in blood to the council's dark will. To most, this was a great honor. To others, it was seen as nothing more than slavery. Many years passed. Me and my brethren had endured our task of bringing those that defied the council's will before them, punishing kindred that went against their laws. But in the background, rumors began to swirl around London. Tales of strange monsters haunting its streets, the dead rising from their graves, the very night sky itself burning with hot moonlight. From all these rumors, one was confirmed to be true: that mortal hunters had begun to gather around the empty city. They seemed to believe the massacre of the kindred was a divine sign, that the city was to become a beacon of hope for their followers. The different hunter groups seemed to rally behind three mysterious individuals, calling themselves the Martyrs. Reports told of these hunters expanding their influence into other kindred realms, purging them with blade and fire. This could no longer be ignored by the council. After years of quarantine, the elders lifted the banishment of kindred from London and decreed a new law. Those of the blood may enter the realm of London under one condition. They must destroy the power behind the slaughter of blood during the night of storms. The kindred that succeeds in this task will be rewarded with freedom from all blood bonds and the title of Prince of London. So it is said by the blood, so it will be by the blood. This new law piqued the interest of many kindred, as the chance for such power and freedom was beyond most. And the idea of becoming prince is a very intoxicating one, especially to a young, inexperienced immortal. The idea that power and freedom to do as one wishes is all that matters. But as you can see, my young friend, from my scars and wounds, becoming a prince always has a price, often paid for in blood. Yes, a price one must endure for an eternity. But come now, pass me some of that fine vitae. My lips have become so very dry, and I still have far more to tell.